everyone who's joining.
Hey, good day.
Good day. Hey, Mark or anyone, can you throw the meeting notes in the Slack if you don't mind? I must have lost them on my other computer here.
Yep, I'll do that now. Thanks for the reminder.
Appreciate it.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can anyone hear me?
We can hear
Yes.
you. Good day.
Good day. It was so quiet.
Yeah, it's a small crowd so far. The meeting notes are also at salsa.dev/notes, which is an easier to remember URL.
That's easy.
And then the notes have the Zoom meeting in it. All right, so it's almost 5 after the hour. So welcome everybody. Pasting the notes meeting in the chat if you could sign in if you haven't already. And a reminder that we'll follow the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct. We could start by welcoming new members, although I don't think we have any new members that I see, unless I'm not seeing it in the participant list. Let's get into the special interest group updates. On the specification side, we are getting close to a 1.0 release candidate. We didn't talk about it at the specification meeting on Monday, but I think we're probably pretty close to doing, like maybe cutting out a release candidate early next week, maybe Tuesday. There's a US holiday on Monday. I think the major final concept is the verification piece, which we've spent a couple weeks on, kind of going back and forth. And I feel fairly confident now that we have a decent idea of how to handle it. So there's a couple pull requests out now. If those land and resonate with the reviewers, then I think there's a couple other smaller cleanups, but I think we're pretty much ready to put out a release candidate and a call for comments. And then we'll go about a month with a call for comments. And then assuming, during that comment period, we will continue to iterate and clarify, shuffle stuff around, but no major content changes unless it comes up during feedback. And then hopefully by the end of March, have a stable release. And that's the current, at least the current thing from my end. Again, we didn't go through all this in a specification meeting on Monday, but anyone feel free to disagree, but I think that's where we're at. Mike asked about having like a another form of a distributable as like a PDF or something like that, yeah, I think that's fine. I think it would also be good. We've talked about this before, of having a better build system, because right now we're just doing everything through GitHub Pages, and GitHub Pages is the builder, and it's like it uses a very specific version of Jekyll that you can't control, and everything has to be done through Jekyll. And it would be nice if we could use like tags and like put multiple versions together. Right now we're doing versioning of the different specs just by like copying and pasting directories, and so fixing up that is on kind of like the nice to have list, but it just hasn't like hit the top of the content is a higher priority, so we just haven't been doing that. Mike?
Oh yeah. No. Yeah, I don't want to derail anything from given how close we are. I think the only other thing I kind of noticed just based on some of the blockers for the 1.0 draft was like it became a little hard to sort of figure out like which of these is just like, hey, this is actually an issue with how we are showing the website versus here's an actual aspect that's like unclear about the content of the specification. And so once again, not saying for now, but maybe in the future for like a 1.1 release or whatever, it might make sense for us to like write it as something like a single specification in, let's say, GitHub, and then the website just becomes a view into that, and we can, copy paste or whatever. But yeah, I think there was a few things in there that it just sort of became a little unclear of, how much of this is like confusion because of how we set up the website versus this is confusion on how of a requirement in the actual spec.
Yeah, and feel free to like, if you notice any of those, we could tag them or use GitHub tags or something to clarify as well. And so I guess I don't think, for the community at large, I guess by the time we do the next community specification, it'll be the end of the RFC period. So just keep an eye out for that. Again, we'll do a blog post announcing it when it's ready. But comments on like just reading the overall spec for both like the levels and the provenance, and see if you have like, if you could try to implement it or implement like a dummy implementation to see if it fits. The major changes for the provenance, we've rejiggered the fields. Conceptually, it's not really different, but we've hopefully renamed fields to make it more clear. And the spec, again, we've trimmed it down, as mentioned previously, to just the build components, and added a concept of expectations, like expected values of what the provenance ought to be. But otherwise, the requirements themselves haven't changed significantly from the previous version. I think that's on the specification side. Is anyone here to talk about positioning?
I can talk about it if,
Yeah,
actually, no,
I was
Jay
trying
has
to
something
find
on.
my mute, but Michael, I was not present in the past two meetings, so I think that you are most updated than me.
Actually, Jay, I think has, Jay's been, I think, attending all of them.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, first, a lot of good stuff has been coming out of the positioning meetings with respect to the upcoming open summit, and a lot of our submissions for CFPs, etc. So we got a lot of that good work done. And mainly we have a panel discussion that we put up to talk about salsa, S2C2F, and Fresca combined. It's the ketchup, mustard, and relish. We all love that title for it anyway. But we worked on that. Also at the working group level, as far as positioning is concerned, we are all talking about an agreement of up-leveling positioning from a working group standpoint to include salsa, S2C2F, and Fresca, to talk about how all three of them are positioned across the entire supply chain, no, across the entire supply chain. So rather than just focusing on one, up leveling and focus across the board. We've also talked about, and in that same vein, talked about a landing page for a landing page for Salsa underneath the OpenSSF, but kind of taking a look at maybe doing one whole for supply chain and then having each respective tab break off so that, you know, from OpenSSF, from the OpenSSF page in general, somebody can go there, pull up what we're doing for supply chain security, see these different efforts, click on them, and then have the respective landing pages from there. Those are the main points that we've discussed over the last few weeks inside of the positioning SIG. Mike and Bruno, please add in if I've missed anything. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, Jay, I know you guys had submitted a couple talks for the open source summit. What's the turnaround on getting that approved or denied? Do you know?
I believe March 10th, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, David. I believe March 10th, and this is across all of the submissions. I think we'll get an approval or whatever it is right around that time period. I'm not terribly sure. We're still waiting on a CFP for OpenSSF Day too, which may be a good opportunity to talk about some of these things as well. So that should be coming around the same time period. And I believe Mike just put up a link there with some timeline type stuff.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Because then we'll just have a better idea of what's actually going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't know if David Wheeler has any information on OpenSSF Day, because that was another one we wanted to kind of talk through and potentially also talk to, like, maybe not for this one, but a future OpenSSF Day, like similar to how the CNCF has like maintainer tracks. It might be nice to have sort of maintainer tracks for things that are sponsored by the OpenSSF, so that, you know, because there's certain folks who want to obviously give talks about various things, but they're also maintainers of projects, and they're like, oh, which do I do? Do I do it as a maintainer of this project, and then I only get that one talk, or do I do it for this other topic that I want to do because, you know, I want to do this other topic? David?
There's apparently no escape for me. Yeah, so OpenSSF Day is May 10. I drafted a call for participation earlier. I'll be honest, I don't know where that is, but I'm expecting that call to be out. If it's not already, I think it's about to get out. We were just the TAC. We wanted to make sure the TAC reviewed and had a chance to comment and make improvements or whatever. And then, okay, there's a link there. And then, you know, the intent is to go review a bunch of proposals and pick what we think are the top ones, and be very, very sad about all the ones we can't take because there's only so much time. Let's see here. The Linux Security Summit, which is also happening that week, their CFP doesn't end until March 1. So we're not the only ones who have a CFP not completed already. Supply Chain Security Con has already it's already passed their deadline, but we won't be the only ones to not be done yet.
David, do you happen to know whether Supply Chain Security Con and OpenSSF Day are going to be at the same time?
Okay. We have been talking with the organizers, and they agree that they're going to do their absolute best to deconflict them. You'll notice they didn't promise to deconflict them, but they have acknowledged that that's going to be an issue, and they will do their best. The way Supply Chain Security Con works is really, it's a track within the larger conference. So if you missed, you wouldn't miss the whole thing. You would just miss the talks that happen to overlap if that's what they end up doing. But
yeah, I'm speaking from lived experience in Dublin, where they overlapped in a very unfortunate way for me.
yeah. How's this? We are aware of the challenge. That does not mean we have perfect solution. I mean, this is the fundamental challenge of trying to do lop onto an existing event. We had talked about having completely separate events, but that was hard even before suddenly people started having travel budget slashes and so on. So I think given the circumstances, this is probably the best we can do at this moment in time. And if
Yep.
it just continues to be untenable, then we can do something else.
I understand. I sympathise with the challenge, and I just wanted to make sure that people were aware and trying to avoid conflicts. I'll accept trying.
Aware, trying. I wish I could give better answer. By the way, and we're also Linux security. The Linux Security Summit is also that week. So I'm on both of those program committees. So I may need to be at 3 places at once. This will be fun.
Congrats, I guess. I'm done.
Can someone post the, I know Mark, you posted that, but that gives me a 404. Thank you.
Oh, Arno, we said yes, sounds good. In general, like I was saying, I would like to have a better build process for the site that's not just using the default GitHub pages. So that way we could like use tags and kind of assemble things without just using a very specific version of Jekyll and like copying and pasting directories for versioning. And as part of that, I think like Trishank mentioned, like maybe there's a plugin to generate a PDF or something like that. Or like a zip file with HTML. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, my summary would be that we are all supportive, but there's a software engineering challenge to make it kind of easy to do and replicatable.
Well, there are different approaches, right? I mean, one would be to create a web page somewhere there on the website that basically includes all the sections on one single page. That would be my first step. And then, you can produce different versions out of that, including PDFs. That's what I was thinking of playing with to start with, but so I don't know if anybody has volunteered to look into this already or not.
I think you just volunteered first.
Okay, that's fine. I'm happy to have a look.
Cool. I know. So in the update framework spec, we use Bike Shed, which is a Markdown preprocessor to generate specs that look like what WG and W3C specs. But I don't know. We used only minimal features from Bike Shed, so I don't know if it would be possible to use that with the way the SLSA spec is managed today. But what we definitely need to avoid is like any more duplication of content.
Oh, I agree. No, I mean, I think with Jekyll, you could create a page that basically includes all the different sections in one without duplicating all the rest. So, but I will look into that Bike Shed as well. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Arno.
Tooling.
Sure. So we've had a little bit of lower attendance over the past few weeks. But the two main things we've been trying to focus on are, one is pushing for the various projects underneath the SLSA itself, so like the various generators, to see if they can be ready to sort of implement draft 1 of the spec ASAP. And then also reaching out to some of the other folks for some of the other projects that are looking at SLSA, like, or that already implement SLSA, like Tecton and Tecton chains that have like a longer release cadence on what that might look like, on, you know, just at least making them aware. So that's one of the big things, and we kind of want to keep doing that. One of the other things that kind of got brought up by a few folks in there was also the desire to, if possible, and we know that this is probably a big ask for a lot of folks, is if the community can sort of come together around at least some basic nouns and verbs for an API for distributing and discovering and consuming SLSA. So, you know, just as an example from PyPI, oh, okay, there should be some REST API that I can pull this down from when I download a package. And let's say if there's a similar REST API with the same sort of structure, you know, or following a similar specification for Ruby gems and NPM and so on, then folks who are building the tools to consume, to pull down SLSA attestations would not need to kind of have, hey, we need to create features for every single individual thing. They'd be able to just say, oh yeah, like all of these folks follow this API spec, and we can just kind of do that. And so I had a couple of conversations with a few folks. I believe there's also something with the, I think it's, what's it called, Securing Software Repositories Working Group, where I had one conversation with them on their APAC meeting, and I'll be having another conversation with them in their EMEA meeting, just to kind of like highlight that sort of problem. Once again, it's not intended to be like the cure-all for everything. Obviously, different folks are going to implement things different ways, but even if we can get some consensus from some of the big package ecosystem maintainers, that would be really nice, so that we don't have to, you know, like the SLSA verifier would not have to implement, you know, 30 different API implementation, or sorry, implement, you know what I mean? Anyway, sorry, Dustin.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thanks for raising this. I have taken an action item to, there's a specific part in the spec right now that sort of is hinting at this as a to-do. So I'm planning to take this on and just sort of in a very general way describe how ecosystems should adopt and distribute SLSA provenance. I am very happy to share that with anyone that wants to be included once the draft is up. And yeah, I will also take that by the work group. So I agree, like, I don't think we'll want this to be super prescriptive for each individual ecosystem. They might want to like tweak it or adopt it to suit their needs. But I think, yeah, a high level general, like, this is how you do it. This is the relationship of provenance to artifacts, that kind of thing would be good. So yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
Thanks. Anything else for tooling before we jump back to positioning?
So the only thing I was just gonna actually remembered is, so I know that the NPM folks actually have a bunch of stuff already done for some of the things they're using, and not to say that we should just adopt, you know, let's say what they're doing already, but I think they seem to be potentially able to sort of say, hey, like, contribute what they've done from an API standpoint. And once again, this is also probably even goes beyond SLSA, but mostly obviously focused around SLSA, but like SBOMs and similar sorts of metadata as well. But just wanted to kind of say that some of the folks from NPM are working on, they're one of the first adopters of like trying to do this with SLSA. So they've been doing a lot of work in that.
Thanks. Melba, I think you had something on SBOM.
I did, and I'm guessing Jay covered the positioning updates earlier. The other ones, okay. So two things. One, in terms of SBOMs, several of us got together because there was some miscommunication of trying to figure out what I was talking about versus what other people were talking about. And essentially, what I was advocating for was enabling the industry to leverage SBOMs, whether it be Cyclone DX, whether it be SPDX, to be leveraged as an artifact for attestation. So SLSA can reference it via BOM reference link or something of the sort. And so I know Brandon Lum joined this Monday, and he said that he was doing it the other way, where the SPDX specification was I think had a predicate for SLSA documents, but not the other way around. So I'll have a to-do to continue that conversation with Brandon, but the whole group, I think, came to the consensus of we do need to define the domain that we want to go after and define the domains that SPDX and Cyclone DX are trying to cover. Try to reduce as much overlap as possible. But obviously there's going to be some that will keep, charging away and want to do everything. But at the very least, we can try to partner with the different communities so that we can leverage what's already there versus reinventing the wheel, so to speak, or at least reference them. So that's one thing. And Mike, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just gonna say, just to add on to some of the stuff, the idea from what Brendan was bringing up was that the build profile in SPDX, you can refer to a SLSA predicate. So it's like, instead of there is a build profile, like if you don't use SLSA, you could still define a build profile, but you can say, hey, instead of defining a build profile in SPDX format, I can essentially refer to a SLSA provenance document and say, that is my build profile. I'm using that as my build profile. And then some folks have been asking for the other way around, which I think Melba brought up, is like, hey, when we have all these materials, could you do something like, instead of listing all my materials, I'm going to have essentially a reference to an SBOM, and that SBOM is a list of all my materials, instead of having to kind of have them in both places and make sure that they're consistent and yada yada. And then obviously there's, and I don't want to get into it, but there's obviously then a little bit of the technical challenge of making sure that you don't have circular references in the tools that, that keep following, but that's kind of a separate thing.
Yeah.
Trishak.
Yeah, thanks for raising this discussion, Melba. I mean, you turned my joke into a very productive question. So, so yeah, this is actually a great question. Even to me, it's not clear how SLSA and SBOMs would relate to each other. I think you might find sort of a new working group called Verifiable SBOMs on the CNCF Slack. Part of the problem that they're trying to solve there is to figure out how to relate SBOMs that you have right now with in toto attestations that we're producing with SLSA. So I think maybe, hopefully, if we're lucky, some of these questions might be answered there. So I'm throwing it out there in case you're interested. Let me also paste the link here.
Thanks. So yeah, we also had representation from in toto, I think it was Sebastian that was on the call, right? And we basically are just trying to use what's there, right? We know the executive order for folks in the US, they're going to be required to provide SBOMs. And we know that we have separated build from source in SLSA. And so when it comes to provenance in terms of source, the SBOM is going to be key. So do we use that artifact instead of trying to recreate the wheel? Can we reference that artifact? We might need other data, but at the very least, let's use what people are already trying to do, so that way it reduces their overhead. And Cyclone DX is very willing to partner with us. And then I know Brandon said that, you know, he's all for it, right? And so we just need to make sure that we continue those conversations instead of trying to overlap without communication, because I think that's what's happening right now. Any other questions on that? And I can try to share the mural. I think I did share the mural for those that did attend. You know, my to-do list to share it out to the open source community. It's just a bunch of sticky notes, you know, of what we were talking about. The other thing I wanted to bring up, if I may share my screen, is Aaron and I were trying to come up with a SLSA roadmap. I can't remember where we got this, where we agreed to this, if it was a spec group or if it was a supply chain integrity. So we were trying to figure out what did we want to do in 2023, and obviously SLSA 1.0 spec, right? We're trying to aim for, and we're trying to aim for it this quarter, right? I'm just using quarters because it's easier than trying to figure out March or whatever. And then the Providence specification, I think we're trying to aim for first quarter as well, based off of the draft that I've seen. But then, you know, we have to start thinking about level 4. We need to start thinking about, I think this was Aaron add this, the verified build system attestation specification. What about the source discussion, right? We've tabled that for some time. Do we think we will have a source discussion and specification, at least a draft, by the end of the year, right? And what about the tooling, right? How do you verify that something is SLSA? How do you provide guidance on producing something that is SLSA compliant? And then there's some other things. So I'd be very interested in feedback from the community. This is just, again, to try to aim for something and try to, as a group, work together to try to achieve these things. So, you know, it may not be possible, but at least we have a target. Go ahead, Mark.
I had a topic about the SBOM too, but regarding the roadmap, I think that's great. We had the one, like the roadmap from the middle of last year. Maybe it would be good to, you know, thanks Joshua for the link. I think it would be good to have a similar update in the proposals repo. It might, what we did with that one was start with a Google Doc because it's just much easier to collaboratively edit in a Google Doc, and then you know, convert it to Markdown for posterity and for ease of reading. So I think this is great. Thank you for starting this. I don't have any comments on, I mean, what you said sounds good. I don't have any content-wise suggestions. I'll raise my hand for the other SBOM thing, but
Okay.
since we're on the topic, I'll let anyone chime in.
Does anyone have thoughts on the contents of the roadmap? What we think we might want to add in here or maybe remove?
Now, just a question about this verified build system attestation specification. What exactly is this?
So this is something Aaron added. So Aaron, are you able to talk to that?
So this is actually like one of those little comments that we had within the build or the spec 1.0. I think I might have linked to that specific instance. This is something that Chris K was kind of chatting a little bit about. Let's maybe scroll up a tad. So this is within the verified build systems, and yeah, maybe Chris can speak to it more, but I'm thinking, you know, there's going to be some sort of attestation around the questionnaire for this, so that would be interesting.
Okay, I'll take a look.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're actually moving away from attestations embedded in the provenance to a mapping that is within verification tooling, so that we don't bloat the provenance and so that it's easier to configure.
Got it.
Oh,
So
wait,
I don't think we need that.
Makes sense. I think I threw that on a while ago when we were having that
Yeah.
conversation, so that makes sense.
Okay, so you're saying, can you repeat that? You said you were moving away.
Moving away from embedding attestations of build conformance in provenance, and instead those attestations will live offline, and verification tooling will have that map. We'll have the mapping from builder IDs to SLSA levels.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that feedback, and thank you for that question. So that I don't know how to do strike through in here. I'll try to delete it. Delete. Any other comments, questions, or ideas? Go ahead, Chris.
I've heard some interest in vulnerability management as either a SLSA track or part of the source track. Is that something, first of all, is there interest in this meeting? Is that something we'd like to capture here or work on this year?
I mean, I like the idea of giving some guidance. I think I've advocated for this for a while. Garbage in is garbage out, right? And so if you don't show that you are scanning, if you don't show that you are producing, nothing is ever vulnerable free, but that you are reducing your risk, then what's the point? But given the discussion we had about domains, right? Do we even want to go there, or do we try to point to something else that's already doing that and leverage that? But I do think it's a good idea to have something defined in terms of vulnerability scanning and making sure you are producing secure software. But I don't know if we want to take that on in 2023. Go ahead. I don't know who had their hand up first.
I think Mark was first. He's at the top of the stack.
Yeah, I think for the vulnerability thing, it might be good for the roadmap. Like, you could even put stuff that like we're thinking about for the future, just to let people know that we're thinking about it. But if we think that it is far in the future, we could just say that. It's probably a useful signal. That way, other people who are thinking about that too can say it. If people want to raise the priority, then say, "Oh no, we need it now. We really need to use it." Then we could talk about raising the priority, et cetera. I did. Do other folks have a comment on the roadmap? I don't want to keep jumping topics.
Yeah, mine was. It kind of builds on what you were just saying as well, Mark. I'd love for us to have like a relatively small set of things that we are committing to within a certain time frame, and then a longer list of things we care about and want to like start building towards. But like 1.0 was a big lift, and we've missed all of our self-imposed deadlines. So I want to try and avoid setting a bunch more deadlines that we're going to miss.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and I think the same thing also goes for like I don't want to conflate the two conversations, but there's also like the scoping conversation just generally of like, hey, how are there certain things that we just don't want on the roadmap that because we just don't want to dive into that scope? Or also, if it is something we might want to dive into, does it make more sense to say, hey, we want to, provide guidance to refer people to other things, but not ourselves take on that work? So I'm just like, there's a lot of different OpenSSF groups, CNCF groups, et cetera, that have stuff around like scanning and some of those other things. And instead of us kind of coming up with our own set of rules, maybe just sort of saying, hey, for when it comes to scanning, look here. Just, once again, don't want to kind of go too deep down that rabbit hole right now. But I think we should be very cognizant also of like, where do we want to limit the scope of SLSA so that to make sure that we're not sort of all doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that comes back a bit to what Mark was saying, where we can kind of draft something, start to generate consensus among the group, and then it's only officially the plan of record when it hits the SLSA proposals repository as a markdown document, and then we can do some of this connecting to other efforts during that initial like draft and review iteration phase.
Yeah, and referring to other projects, I think like hopefully with the 1.0 release, what I'm hoping for is that this notion of separate tracks allows us to work on stuff in parallel. And if we did a good job for 1.0, we can make the tracks relatively independent. And so if there's a group of folks within OpenSSF or otherwise who are working on, say, vulnerability stuff, we could have it folded, have a vulnerability track that's being developed independently by a different set of people. Obviously we want some coordination, make things are consistent, but that I think is one possible path as well. Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, so a couple of items. David's asked a couple of questions and a few other SIG meetings regarding making sure, and this is only speaking to the build track and then the source track, and we're going to be discussing the source track, and then we're also going to comment on the vulnerability track as well. There is a lot of stuff that we're doing, right? We talked about SBOMs, but then we also have VDR documents and VEX documents, right? And VDR and VEX documents, they run along the same line, but do a couple of different things. And we talk about a vulnerability track. We talking about vulnerabilities in the supply chain in general, or are we talking about vulnerabilities based on what gets produced from the build? But you have two documents there that can help with that already. We shouldn't be over-engineering that. In terms of the source track and the build track, we're also working on two other things inside of the higher level supply chain integrity. David made a good suggestion that we should probably sit down to make sure that there are bridges. There are going to be some overlaps, but making sure that we're not having competing ideology across all of the things that we're working on. So I think that, and I'm talking about SLSA, S2C2F, Fresca, and then whatever else we're working on. When we consider these the breakouts and then what talks about these breakouts, I think it might be prudent for us to do that before we take too deep of a dive, and that's just for scoping purposes, so that we're scoped correctly.
David, I suspect you're responding to your name being mentioned several times, so I'm going to defer to you if that's the case.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So yeah, real quick. Yeah. So I would particularly focus on conflicts. A little overlap is probably unavoidable. I'm expecting documents to have some differences, cover different areas, because otherwise why have two? It's the conflicts that concern me. So I don't know of any conflicts offhand. I just want there to be several people to put eyes on it to make sure, in particular, that SLSA and S2C2F either don't have conflicts, or if they do, that we understand why they are. And my suspicion is that there's a conflict. It's probably a lack of clarity at this point, but I just want to make sure that we really take a look at that.
Josh?
Yeah, not really directly related to what Jay and David were talking about, but I was just wondering if we might want to try and, as an early roadmap item post 1.0, try and capture some guidelines for how to define a track. Like the principles are a really good start for what we're trying to achieve with SLSA, but if we want this to be easily parallelizable and for others to be able to present potential tracks for inclusion almost as like complete draft documents, then having some guidelines around that would be super helpful.
Mark?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
So one thing, in terms of the conflict and making sure we're in sync, I think I didn't get an official response from Mike yet, so I'll wait for that response. But if we do become a upper level positioning group, so it's not just SLSA, it's supply chain integrity as a whole, then we can make sure that that's discussed there, right? Making sure that we don't have too much conflict, making sure that the domains are properly defined and that we can map to each other, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I think, what we've been envisioning for that higher level positioning group, but still waiting on confirmation.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think I took an action item last week to bring that conflict resolution topic to the supply chain integrity working group, but I missed the meeting this week. Yeah, but that I agree with your statement about that.
To pop back to the SBOM conversation, just one thing. When we left that conversation last time, we didn't have any like clear, to my recollection, like a clear owner for this. The big thing was this idea that right now in the SLSA provenance, there's this resolved dependencies field. And the idea, if I understood correctly, was effectively to either replace, in some form, replace that with a reference to an SBOM, either like inline parts of the SBOM or use the same schema, or you refer to the SBOM, or you have multiple attestations or something. I think in general, something to reduce duplication between the provenance and the SBOM, because it's the list of dependencies that is the overlap. This seems like something we should clarify we should figure out for 1.0. If we're able to. I think it's fine if we don't get to it before the release candidate, but I do want to figure it out before we mark it as stable. Well, actually, no, let me ask you this. That was maybe too assertive. Is this something we want to do for 1.0? And if so, what's the next steps here?
My vote is to not do it for 1.0 right now, unless it's just something that is super simple to sort out, just because I think my worry is if the SPDX and Cyclone DX folks start, just as an example, come in with suggestions or whatever, it's going to push back a lot of the other stuff for a really long time. Also, I think that there's still a lot of stuff from their end that's still being sorted out, especially from the SPDX side of what they're thinking about. And I think we should stay in communication, and if we can, make sure that like nobody's making any decisions that would stop us from collaborating in the future.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right? I don't think we want to, and I think we mentioned this during that call, we don't want to be bound by their timelines, right? But we do want to keep the communication lines open. But I also think we need to have a story to tell when people start asking, right? Because people will start asking, and they have already started asking in IBM, how does SBOM play into this? Can we use this? So we need to have a good response to that. It doesn't have to be a perfect response, but we need to have a story around that.
Yeah, one thing, I agree on the timelines. I guess what I was thinking, the only thing that would be actually practical would be to look at if we take existing examples of provenance in a 1.0 format and use an existing format like SPDX 2.3, I think is the latest version, or Cyclone DX, whatever's the, I don't remember the current number, whatever the current latest stable. And just try literally taking the same data we have now and just putting it in that other format and see what it looks like. I have some concerns around complexity there of like, used to be able, you know, if you were in a use case where like the one SLSA predicate solved your whole use case, now you have to understand these two different things, and that kind of sucks. But at least kind of looking at that, maybe that's something we could do within the next week, just to kind of give us an idea of, you know, where we might go here. Mike?
Yeah, one other thing, or two other things to add is, yeah, I think some of it is gonna come out organically from some of the tools as well. Some of the tools already, like, once again, we have two SBOM formats, right? And they have differing use cases depending on who you talk to and exactly what the scope of them is. And I also want us to not maybe not get too hung up on, hey, why can't we just use this other thing for that as well? Because I think that, you know, when the use cases are really overlapping, I agree. And I think that there are definitely some places where we want to be cognizant of that. But I think throughout, you know, throughout history, right, you have folks being like, why can't we just use this, the data that's the output of this SCA scan? Why can't I just use this like JSON that's the output of this other thing just as my SBOM or whatever? And so I do think, yeah, sorry, I don't know hate against the SWID. But I think that there are a lot of differing formats and differing tools, and a lot of folks, you know, because once again, there's also formats that I believe like medical devices have been using for a really long time. And, you know, hey, why are we not using that? And, you know, I think that we could get hung up there for quite a long time as well. And so I think it's going to be an intricate balance.
So if I may interject, I mean, I agree with you, but I think, you know, back to what Melba was saying, what's important is to be able to answer the questions that are likely to pop up, right? So I think if we can just agree among us that, yeah, this is an area we recognize the overlap and we are investigating ways to, you know, possibly link the two rather than duplicate the information, I think that's a reasonable answer and position to have. And that, you know, in the immediate needs, I think is good enough.
Okay, we're close to out of time. Any other last comments? Okay, and so for the specific SBOM thing, it sounds like no, well, I don't think we have consensus on exactly what we should do here. It sounds like, is there at least consensus that probably for 1.0, this is not going to happen?
Yep.
Arno, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, you know, realistically speaking, if we want to get 1.0 done, you can't just keep adding new features that are not even, you know, really figured out yet. So just from a practical point of view, I think, you know, this is, I mean, I think it would be good to do the exercise you were talking about, to try to investigate what it might look like. And, you know, so that maybe at least we don't close the door, or maybe we have an idea on how we would accommodate this. But I don't think, you know, this is a must up. Right?
And I did have that takeaway from the last meeting, Mark, to try to get someone to do that. I've not gotten firm commitment. So if anyone else is interested in doing that analysis, feel free. But I know that there were some people concerned about this internally. So I've been trying to get them to say, hey, you're concerned about this. Why don't you help? So, but not gotten a commitment from them yet.
Dave.
Yeah, so I'm totally sympathetic to Arno's comment that if you want to get a one out done ever, you eventually have to say, please stop. I think the one thing that I'm thinking through, and my apologies, I don't have a solution here, is just trying to make sure that we don't cut off a door. In other words, I don't. It's perfectly reasonable to say, we can't solve everything this instant. I don't know of anything, if we don't say anything, that this cuts off. But so I guess I will put this out to the group. If we don't, and that seems reasonable, is there anything we can do to make sure that we're not preventing that future later extension for a 2.0 or 1.5 or pick your version number?
Yeah, I think we can communicate that. I think there's a natural opportunity to try and arrive at convergence in that in our future directions document we've listed a potential requirement as being including a list of all dependencies in the provenance. Right, that feels like a better opportunity to try and achieve this than right now. So we can not only articulate that we want to do, or we're open to doing this, but also that there's a future requirement where this kind of alignment would fit better.
Yeah, and I think with the 1.0 format, I could actually, with the V1 format, I think it could be a non-breaking change that right now you could list resolve dependencies inline. We could probably have an optional field that, as a reference, and it doesn't really, it would be equivalent, if you don't parse it, then it's equivalent to just not having it there anyway. It's not a required field. It also seems possible that you could either stick the SBOM in the subject or stick it in, we now have a byproducts field in the current draft. Right now, there's no convention for how you reference that and how you would know that this thing is an SBOM versus something else. But maybe that could be an addition as well.
Yeah, if I can quickly respond back, the reality is we're working on an SBOM 1.0, but I'm wondering if maybe this suggests a revisit of including a version ID somewhere, under the theory that there will be a 2.0 eventually with potential changes that might be very good for recipients to know. Are we talking SLSA 1.0 or 2.0? And I think that's actually all you need, because if you can identify, oh, this is the newer version, then you can tell well, it was optional before or it wasn't defined. Now I expect to see it. I realize it's a late thing, but I've commented about that before, but I may as well mention it now, Mark.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we have a major version number in there, not a minor version. Feel free to open the issue. Okay, we're over time. I don't want to take up anyone's more time. Thank you, everyone. It was great. I think it was super productive, and talk to everyone later. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.